Hello, and welcome to a special bonus episode of Hunter Fuel Presents Supernatural Rewatch Podcast for adults who enjoyed their show with a chaser. I am Liz, and Wizard Dave is taking some well-deserved vacation time this week. So we are not going to have our usual supernatural episode. However, the supernatural universe is big and it includes 17 official tie-in novels, four six-issue graphic novel series, a 22 episode animated series. There's two bestiaries, two hunter journals, and of course the 13 episode The Winchesters prequel series. As I've said before, I don't consider anything that we don't see on screen to be canon, but there's some fun stuff in there. So if you need a little more supernatural in your life, the other media can be entertaining additions. As a bonus episode, I thought it could be fun to take a look at the prequel series. It's a graphic novel series called Supernatural Origins. As a spoiler alert, if you've not read Origins and think that you might like to, I'm going to be talking about what happens during the whole six issues of that comic book series. And it was published in 2007, right around the end of season two. So there are some crossover plot points that I'm going to be talking about. If you haven't seen the show up that far, you may want to hold off on watching this bonus episode until you're all caught. With that, cheers, my friends. Let's get this show on the road. So it begins with Mary's death, and uh, this is not. Oh my goodness, we're just getting started, and this is why we need Wizard Dave. We're already having some technical issues. So this is the first panel in the comic series, the graphic novel. So you can tell right away this starts immediately upon Mary's death, and it covers really the events that got John into hunting in the first place. So we start with her death. Dean is 4. Sam is 6 months old. And as it's presented in the graphic novel series, Dean has not spoken since the night of her death, which is something that is mentioned in the official John's journal. The officially published John's journal mentions this as well, that Dean hasn't spoken. And Sam, on the other hand, who's 6 months old, he cries all the time. And John's internal monologue says, he cries like he's got something terrible inside. Which again, if you've seen through season two, you know what that's alluding to. So John is trying to find answers. He keeps insisting that something supernatural happened to his wife. I mean, she died pinned to the ceiling, eviscerated, on fire. That was not a natural death. But nobody believes him. And, they just think that he's gone insane with grief. And he's really in a very like kind of desperate place where he wants to know what's happened to his wife. He's asking the neighbors, have you seen anything? And everybody just kind of, they feel sorry for him, but they're just kind of dismissing him. So he's out hustling pool, and I do think it's kind of fun that we see him hustling pool prior to becoming a hunter. So I imagine that this is something he picked up maybe as a Marine, but this is something that he does to kind of take his mind off of what's going on. He ends up hustling some folks who are not good sports about being separated from their money. And it's starting to ramp up into what's about to be a bar brawl. And we meet, for the first time in the comic series, we meet Missouri Mosley. So in season one, episode 9, episode called Home, which we've covered on this podcast, we meet Missouri Mosley. So this is, 2 decades before the boys meet Missouri. Um, we see John's introduction to her, and she uses her psychic ability to diffuse this brawl that's brewing, and she backs down the guy who lost his money to John. She starts talking to John, and she says to him she can help him figure out what happened to his wife, but she wants something in exchange. She tells him that evil has taken root in the dusty back roads of America. And so in exchange for helping him, she wants him to get involved. She suggests he needs to become a hunter and help stem the tide, this rising tide of evil that she senses. So she tells him she has a premonition about a family that's in danger. She goes with him to a house where she believes that the people who live there are they're about to be attacked by the same thing that killed John's wife. So they get there and they arrive too late. The house is just covered in blood. The people who live there are very dead. And painted on the walls in blood are the words, "We're coming for the children." John has left Sam and Dean with a family friend, a friend of Mary's named Julie, and he believes that this whole thing has been a distraction to separate him from the boys. So he goes running back. He's, desperate to get back to his sons, and they find what's left of Julie in the house. And once again, there's blood everywhere. Something has savagely attacked her. He's running through the house. He's desperate to find his boys, to find out if they're safe. Um, and he does find them. They're fine. The two of them are in a room. It's unclear how much they might have known about what's going on. It's not said if they were asleep, if they slept through the whole thing, or if they were awake. Did Dean hear his mother's friend dying? Did he go investigate? Did he see Julie being killed? None of that is addressed, but it is the first time Dean speaks, according to the graphic novel, since Mary died. And when John comes into the room, he says, "Daddy." So that's the first thing that he says. I think that's a little sweet. Um, Missouri, meanwhile, while John is checking on the boys, she goes through Julie's remains and she finds an enormous fang in the remains in what's left of Julie, who's just been brutally attacked. She's not in one piece. And she tells John, Missouri tells John that this fang is from the thing that killed his wife. She sends him to a man named Fletcher Gable. Fletcher Gable is a character who is exclusive to Supernatural Origins. We don't see him outside of this graphic novel series. And he's an eccentric dude. He's pretty weird. But he tells John that the tooth is from a black shuck, which he identifies as being an overgrown hellhound. He describes it as being hell's own pit bull. In Crossroad Blues, which is season 2, episode 8, Sam also calls hellhounds demonic pit bulls. So we see some common language in the series and in the graphic novel series as well. There's a reference to Devil's Gates. We first hear about Devil's Gates in the pilot, but we get our first look at one in All Hell Breaks Loose Part 2, which is the season finale for season 2. So Gable mentions them as well. Gable also gives John a blank journal to use as his hunter's journal. Now, we'll find out in season 8 that the journal that John uses is actually it belonged to his father Henry. We learn that in As Time Goes By in episode 12, season 8. Um, and so there's a little bit of a continuity error here. Now it makes absolute sense that I mean at the time they were they were writing this graphic novel. The idea that the show would go on for 8 seasons was crazy talk. There's no show makes it to 8 seasons, let alone 15. So, we can't really expect them to have envisioned out that far, long past when they thought the show was going to survive. But there is a little bit of a continuity break there. You can imagine a scenario where Gable hands this journal to John and says, write down everything, document everything, it's important. And he say, well, thanks for the blank book. I've got my dad's notebook. I'm going to use that instead. So it certainly doesn't break anything, but it's it's an interesting difference between the show and the novel. So Gable sends John and the boys to California based on the most recent sightings he's aware of a black shuck. Shortly after the Winchesters get on the road, a mysterious man in a long trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat shows up at Gable's house, and he asks where Gable sent them. So we don't know who that is, but what what we do have is so first of all, I want to show you again, bear with me, we're going very low tech here. So this is a fun little panel in the novel, graphic novel, as Missouri is talking to John about the this evil that has taken root. And we can see the scarecrow, we can see Hookman, we've got a broken mirror and Bloody Mary. So these are the urban legends that the boys battle first in season 1. And then John, once he realizes, okay, he's going after this black shuck. He's gonna need to armor up. He goes to the store and he's got little Dean and he's got Sam in his arm and he says, "I need something in a size 12," which is obviously a 12 gauge shotgun. And you can see from that panel that the the style, the artistry of the graphic novel is very dark. It's almost impressionistic. The color palette is very muted. And I imagine that they were kind of going for um, trying to emulate the look of the show. We know, the series was really very dark and shadowy at the beginning. It they muted that a bit. They kind of backed it up a little bit as the show went on, but it started with that really kind of gorgeous dark shadowy excuse me look, and I suspect that they were trying to emulate that. So now that John is has his hunter's starter arsenal, he's got a shotgun. He's heading to California with the boys. They stop at a motel room and we're introduced to a character named Uncle Jacob. So it's a little unclear at first if the person who showed up at Gable's house looking for the Winchesters, if that's now Uncle Jacob or if it's somebody else. Um, but Jacob raised Mary after her parents were killed. We see her parents, Samuel and Deanna Campbell. We see their deaths in season 4, the third episode, which is called In the Beginning. And according to the graphic novel, Uncle Jacob raised Mary. And it, it's a at the beginning of the graphic novel, here's where things get a little interesting. So at the beginning of the graphic novel, we get his internal monologue, and he's saying, he couldn't even arrange a funeral for her. And now we've got this Uncle Jacob showing up. Later in the TV series in Supernatural, the the boys go to visit Mary's marker, her headstone, in season 2, episode 4. Children shouldn't play with dead things. And Dean says at that time that Mary's headstone was paid for by some uncle they've never met. So Jacob is not a character in the series. We don't see him show up again anywhere other than here in Origins. But it's the kind of thing where, like, if Jacob is the one who paid for the headstone, that's kind of an interesting tie. Now, again, Dean says they never met Uncle Jacob. If the graphic novel is presenting Jacob as the person who bought the headstone. That's not entirely true, but Dean would have been 4 and Sam 6 months old, so they wouldn't have remembered him anyway. So it may not technically be true, but it's an interesting thing to consider that maybe Jacob is the one who bought her headstone. One of the big things, and one of the things I like the most about the graphic novel, honestly, is that it talks about John's decision-making process for how he becomes a hunter, why he decides to take the boys with him. And it's something that, fans of this series have pointed out, I think rightly, that John is not father of the year here, right? This is not great parenting to take a 4-year-old and an infant out on the road and move them around a lot. But what the graphic novel does is it adds some nuance to that situation that he's in. Because, I mean, the reality is that John is in an impossible situation. He has these two small children. He's looking for the thing that killed his wife in an effort to get revenge, yes, but protect his sons from it as well. Uh, Something supernatural happened to her. No one believes him. The first time he leaves the boys with a friend of Mary's, they're torn apart by a demon dog. Right? So what is he gonna do? He feels like they need to be protected. He's the best equipped to protect them. Um, but at the same time, he can't strap a baby to his back and go hunting monsters. So he's in an impossible situation and he does kind of the best that he can. But now here he's got a lead on this black shuck he believes killed his wife, and he decides he's going to take Uncle Jacob with him because maybe if Jacob sees some shit too, maybe he'll believe John. And it gets him some support. So he decides he and Jacob are gonna go after this black shuck. Um, he bribes the motel clerk to watch the boys, and the two of them head off to a cemetery, seeing if they can track down this thing. Jacob is not buying it. He's like, "What is wrong with you? You've got these two small kids. You've lost your mind." Like, and he starts saying like he's gonna take the boys, just like he did with Mary when her parents were killed and she needed someone to take care of her. John is like, "They're my sons. They need to stay with me." And Jacob decides, "Okay, I'm gonna prove to you this is all bullshit. Watch this." Um, you're you're not gonna believe this, but it doesn't go well for Jacob. He's he's attacked by a giant hellhound with one tooth. Um, Before I go on, I do want to mention that before he's killed by a demon dog, um, Jacob and John do have this kind of interesting conversation about y- y- John is saying the boys deserve to know that they're safe from this thing that killed their mother. And Jacob says it's not going to bring her back, which is very, very similar to a conversation Sam and Dean have in the pilot. And again, they have it in Salvation, which is episode 21 of the first season. So, pardon me. So again, there's some crossover in the language between the graphic novel series and the show. The hunt goes badly from there. So Jacob is very dead. The dog turns to John, who is just ill-equipped. And he's about to end up pretty much just as dead as he thinks Jacob is when he's saved by this mysterious man we had seen earlier. So it wasn't Uncle Jacob after all who showed up at Gables. It was this mysterious guy. He tells John that Jacob is not in fact dead. However, we can't take him to a hospital. He's a goner. Like, what are we gonna say? He got torn apart by a demon dog? Like, we've got to do something else. So he convinces John that the best thing to do is to load Jacob into his car, and even though he's not dead yet, uh, toss him off a cliff into a lake. So Jacob drowns, the car is gone, but the good news is, they've hidden the body. So so we see eh, John, we see how desperate John is really, that he's taking the word of some person he's just met. He doesn't even know the guy's name, and he's already doing things that are out of character, one hopes, for John. The other thing that this mysterious guy does is he drops this bombshell on John that the hellhound is not the thing that killed Mary. The the black shuck is a pet of whatever it was that murdered his wife. And so who's going to keep a demon dog as a pet but a demon? So that issue of this graphic novel series ends there with the hellhound wasn't what killed Mary, cliffhanger. And the next issue starts with this really weird flash forward to 1991. So up to this point, all the events are in 1983, right after Mary's death. We cut to 1991. So Dean is 12, Sam is 8, and Dean is packing up to run away. And his logic is that if he's gone, John will be forced to pay more attention to Sam. And so we get this sense from Dean that Dean realizes how much John depends on him to look after Sam, when John is gone on the road so much. And Dean thinks that, okay, if I'm not in the picture, John will have no choice but to be a father to Sam because he's not going to have anybody else to do it for him. Eh, eh, Given what we know in the show about how important family is to Dean, I think this is a legitimate sacrifice he makes here. Um, m- I suspect at 12, he probably has some motivations of his own that he doesn't want to spend his life being, father and mother to his younger brother, which is something we'll hear Dean say um, very late into the show. But at the same time, I think he genuinely also believes that this is what's best for Sam. And that's it. That's where we leave it. Sam is tearfully begging Dean not to leave him. And then we get back to 1983. Pardon me. The mysterious dude tells John, Hunter, because that's totally above board not to give a guy your name after you've murdered someone together. And eh, tells he tells John again that Mary's killer must be this hellhound's master, which must be a demon. He then takes John to Harvell's Roadhouse. So in the series, we meet Ellen Harvell, her daughter Jo, in the season 2, episode 2 is called Everybody Loves a Clown. And that's the first time we meet them there. So this is when John meets them. Ellen says she has a daughter who's a few years younger than Dean. There's some other sources that say Joe's birthday is in 1985, which would make her 2 years younger than Sam and therefore not alive when Sam is 6 months old. So there's a continuity error here. But either way, the it, it's kind of fun to see we meet Joe, we meet her husband Bill, who we learn later in the series is, by the time Sam and Dean arrive at Harvell's Roadhouse, Bill is has died. Um, but the mysterious hunter calls Harvell's a wretched hive of scum and villainy, which is, of course, a reference to the Mos Eisley Cantina in Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. He tells John, this hunter, that John needs some training up. That, hey, look, if you're gonna find this thing that killed your wife, you're gonna have to get better than what you showed me at the cemetery back there where that black shuck nearly kicked your ass. Um, so they and the third red shirt hunter go out after another monster. Uh, pardon me, which they identify at first as being a spring-heeled jack, which we first hear mentioned in the show in the episode The Benders in season 1, episode 15. They talk about a spring-heeled jack. So they leave. I think this is a cute little panel here. Those three hunters go out and they leave Sam and Dean at Harvell. So we've got Ellen in the foreground here carrying the tray. That's Bill in the background, her husband, and he's holding up young Dean, teaching him to play pool. So I think that's cute that this is when Dean starts to learn to play pool at Harvell's, and then Sam is propped on the side of the pool table, and there's somebody else entertaining him while John and these other two hunters are out after some kind of a monster. Uh, John says during this hunt that he's never killed anything before, which honestly I find really unlikely for a Marine in Vietnam to have never killed someone before. It's not impossible, but it just seems really unlikely. Whether it makes sense or not, that's the way they present it in the graphic novel, and so he's really hesitant to shoot this monster. Turns out the monster is not a Spring Hill Jack, it's instead a shapeshifter. They're in the car on the way back to Harvell's, and the hunter starts telling John, this third hunter here, that's not the guy we left with. The monster was a shapeshifter, and you have to kill it. So he goads John into killing the hunter that this mysterious guy insists is a shapeshifter. Is he? Is he not? Mm, the guy who won't tell you his name says he's a shapeshifter. You've got to blow his head off, John. So John does. And we have this. I'm going to move this around a bit because I know there's a bad glare here. Um, so just as John blows the top of this guy's head off, here comes Dean running out of Harvell saying, "Daddy." And the other thing I think is kind of interesting, and I'm gonna use this ring light to my advantage here. Up on top of Harvell's is this very mysterious figure here, which is interesting. Um, so that's great parenting. So now your 4-year-old has watched you decapitate a man with a shotgun at close range. That I'm sure is going to have no impact on Dean whatsoever. Next issue. So, um, so this mysterious hunter is clearly prodding John into behaviors that are potentially out of character for him. He's definitely encouraging him to stay on the road as a hunter. And we get this other panel here of John saying, I never wanted this. I never wanted to be a monster hunter. All I wanted was my family back. My family's all I have left. But what this hunter promises him is that, I can get you your wife back. If you stick with me, if you keep hunting with me, I can get you your family back together. So he's clearly, using John's desperation to keep him in this hunter lifestyle. Cut back to this flash forward to 1991, and Dean, as he's packed up, backpack on his shoulder, ready to walk out and leave Sam behind, he decides he's going to stop and read John's journal, as you do when you're looking to make a quick exit because your brother's crying and begging you not to leave. You stop and read a journal. Now, at this point, John has only been keeping this journal about 8 years, so I'm sure it's going to be a super fast read. As Dean is reading through this journal, he comes across this message from John to Dean telling him, I need you to take care of your brother, which convinces Dean not to leave after all. And that's it. That's that flash forward. That's all that's there for. Next issue starts, and in the series, in Supernatural, in season 3, episode 15, Time is on My Side, the boys take on Doc Benton. And they mention there that it's in John's journal. So they know that their dad had taken on Doc Benton previously. And it says in John's journal that he cut out the doc's heart. Now, what he fails to mention is that he did it with a chainsaw. And we see that in the graphic novel that after making a Texas Chainsaw Massacre reference, he takes out Doc Benton with a chainsaw to the chest. Um, and we get and again, and that's pretty much it. It's just a hunt that John is on. So if you read the graphic novel, if you read, excuse me, the graphic novel when it first came out, you would have known that when the episode 15 of season 3 aired. So that's kind of fun that they got ahead of something there. We also have in Origins, we get an introduction to Pastor Jim. So in the show, Pastor Jim is mentioned first in the episode Asylum, which is season 1, episode 10. And then again, also in season 1, episode 18, they mention him in Something Wicked. Meg kills Pastor Jim in episode 21 called Salvation. So we get his backstory here. And what's kind of interesting to me about it is so Pastor Jim, he tells them that uh, his his mother went insane when he was a child and attempted to drown him and his brother. She succeeded with the brother, but he survived. So it's a little bit of a woman in white story where the mother is kind of overcome by something terrible and tries to drown her children or murder her children. But instead of a woman in white origin story, what we have is Pastor Jim's origin story that this experience has given him the ability to summon spirits. So the mysterious hunter takes John to Pastor Jim to get him in contact with his wife. Pastor Jim starts conducting this ritual, and he does succeed in summoning Mary. And there is this really beautiful panel here. It's a very different look from the rest of the graphic novel. And so John is very excited to have this opportunity to talk to his wife, but unfortunately, it goes badly, and this hellhound uses Mary's connection to John as a conduit to try to come through itself. It fails, but the experience convinces John that his wife is gone, that this dream he has of trying to get his family back together is just never going to happen. At the same time, it causes him to take a closer look at this tooth. And he realizes that among the symbols carved into the tooth, rather conveniently, there are some symbols that he missed. There's some numbers. And there's a 1127 carved into the tooth along with the other symbols, which he recognizes as being both Mary's time of death and the time of death of her friend Julie. It's a little bit of a stretch that, John, as his wife is screaming and he's running up the stairs, he's going to pause to look at his watch and know that it's exactly 11:27. I also think it's a little odd slash unlikely that the coroner would be able to precisely time Julie's time of death to 11:27, but we're going to roll with it. And through something of a convoluted route, they take that 1127 and they trace it to a place in the Four Corners region of the United States called the Four Inn, Foreinn. So four like foresight. Um, what I like about it as a name is that it sounds like foreign, and it kind of underscores that John is, a stranger in a strange land. But as the graphic novel points out, if you rearrange the letters, you come up with the Inferno. What follows is this worked out shroom trip of this really weird set of happenings with dead bodies, and it makes absolutely no sense. So whatever they were smoking when they wrote it, they really need to share because it was clearly some good shit. Um, but they finally make their way to the Four Inn, and waiting for them when they arrive is the one-toothed hellhound. And surprise, surprise, who could have seen this coming? The hellhound works for this mysterious hunter. So the hunter is in fact a demon that has possessed the body of a hunter who's known to the community at Harvell's as a Trojan horse. The whole thing is a setup. And this demon has been using John's desperation to get the thing that killed his wife, to manipulate John into becoming a hunter. He says they needed him and his boys out there hunting and training. And it's very similar to what the yellow-eyed demon says to Sam in All Hell Breaks Loose Part 1, which is season 2, episode 21, about him needing Sam out on the road, hunting sharp. So we can really see the demons starting almost immediately upon Mary's death to nudge events in that direction. Um, Later in the series, we realize we meet a character named Brady, that we realize the demons were involved in Sam's life a lot earlier than we realize in the pilot. We find out later in the series something was even going on with like Sam's prom date. Um, so it's aligned with the way the show ultimately tells this story. Um, that the demons are starting kind of right away to manipulate events to get where they want to be. So John kills the demon and his pet hellhound with the hellhound's own tooth, which is kind of cool, and he burns the four into the ground. He realizes at this point that going back to a normal, peaceful life is just out of the question. That there's no way, knowing what he knows about the evil that's out there and the people it's hurting, he can't just turn a blind eye to it. And he also decides that he's going to keep his sons with him. He says at one point to Dean that Sam depends on him like I do. So Dean is 4 years old, and his father is saying, "I depend on you." So again, if you're familiar with the show, you know that this is a recurring thing. Just how much John leaned on Sam, and we see it, or excuse me, on Dean, and we see really how early that starts. That it's very shortly after Mary's death that he starts really depending on Dean to grow up way too quickly. Um, and it ends with the words, "We got work to do." So with that, that is the end of the 6 issues. I'm going to start with what I hated. I know I usually start with what I loved, but and I know I mentioned this already, but I kind of don't love the artwork. Again, I think that they were going for an attempt to kind of emulate the look of the show, which I appreciate. But in terms of just visual interest, it's almost impressionistic, and I don't personally find it to be really engaging visuals for my personal taste. There's also some stuff that just full on doesn't make sense. I mean, we've got to give it some latitude. I'm not gonna judge it for, well, this says that John's journal came from this guy named Gable, but we find out in season 8 that it came from Henry. Like, okay, those are things you can't expect them to have known those things. But giving it latitude for things like that, there's still some stuff that just really doesn't make sense. Like, he's a Marine in Vietnam and he's never shot anybody before. He seems to be kind of not great at hunting, which I understand they're looking for a story arc for him. But it just kind of doesn't jive with what we've seen in the show. I mean, i- in the pilot, as he's racing up the stairs when he hears Mary scream, he's got a gun cabinet in the living room. So this is a guy who's comfortable around firearms. So I find all that a little odd. The flash forwards to 1991, I already talked about, kind of don't make a lot of sense to me. And then that whole like weird, trippy showdown between John and the Hellhound and the demon really sort of doesn't make any sense. So those are all things that I wish they'd handled a little differently. What I do love, however, is I like the backstory of the characters that we meet in the series, like Missouri and Pastor Jim. I also like that it adds some nuance to John's decision-making process about why he's bringing the boys with him. Um, and how leaving them alone when he goes out on the actual hunt is kind of the lesser of two evils. um I think that it could um be kind of a what am I trying to say here? What'll make it better? Well, why to make it better? I think that he's to a certain, I mean, he's definitely looking for revenge. That's I think that's very true. But at the same time, we see him really starting to grapple with the idea that whatever killed his wife wasn't after his wife, that his sons are still in danger. The best way to protect them is by killing whatever killed his wife. And we really get this sense that like saving people, hunting things was never supposed to be the family business. And so I like all of that. I also like that it steps into this 22-year gap between when we see Mary's death in the pilot, and then when we pick back up with Sam in college, getting ready to go to his interview for law school, that we see that it wasn't that the demons were lying dormant during that time, that they were still working, they were still maneuvering behind the scenes, and I like all of that. So before we go, there is at the end of issue one, there is a little bonus graphic mini novel called Speak No Evil. It takes place on November 2nd, 1989. So Sam is 6, Dean is 10, and they're at this motel in Tulsa. According to Sam, it's Mary's birthday, and Dean says that she'd be 34 that day. Neither one of those things is correct. So Mary was born on December 5th, 1954. So on November 2nd, 1983, when she died, she was just a few weeks shy of her 30th birthday. So her next birthday, were she still alive, she would have turned 35. So they're a little off on their dating there. Um, but it is the 6 year anniversary of her death. On this date, it is a meaningful date. Sam is asking Dean, how did she die? And Dean lies and he says it was a car accident. While this conversation is taking place, they're standing alongside a pool, and it's kind of cute. Sam's got some goggles, and like he's gonna go snorkeling in the pool. But when they get there, it's just not fit for people to be swimming in. It reminds me a bit, this is an old reference, but if you've ever seen the original Karate Kid movie with Ralph Macchio, um, he and his mother are heading out to California, and the whole way they're there, she's going on and on about how wonderful this pool is going to be. They get to the apartment complex that they're moving into. They look at the pool, and the pool is a horror show. It's like, no, the pool is no bueno. This scene here with Sam and Dean next to this derelict pool makes me think of the Karate Kid. And Sam is really disappointed, and Dean's like, you can't swim anyway, what do you care? And it really feels like something that Dean is um he sees his brother's upset, he wants his brother to not be upset, and so he says, like, you can't swim, what do you care? But it feels like something he's just at 10, he's not equipped, to help his brother through this. So they're walking back to the room. As they're just about to walk into their motel room, their father and a stranger come crashing out of the motel room through the window. They land on the pavement next to Sam and Dean. Uh, it- John is screaming at the boys. He says, Dean, take your brother, get out of here as fast as you can. They hop in the car. And Dean, who's 10, wrestles his brother into the car, and he drives baby away to a prearranged spot where they can hide for John to come find them. This reminds me of a couple things. One, in season 11, so a long time from now, in season 11, in the episode Baby, which is episode 4 of that season, Dean is telling Sam about this recurring dream he has where John is teaching him to drive. And he says, not like when he really did it when I was a kid, but, when I was 16, when most people are learning to drive. So we do see that here, so Dean is obviously well below the legal driving age when John teaches him to drive the car. Um, and also in The Usual Suspects, which is episode 7 of season 2, we see that the boys have a code and a plan for if they're separated. And we learn there that it's, check into the first motel in the phone book under the name Jim Rockford. So there's some parallels here where, like, we're going to see this in the show, and so it just underscores it here that from the time they're pretty young, John has trained them. Here's what you do if things go pear-shaped on us. Here's, you know, Dean, you're in charge. Take your brother and go, and I will find you. So they go to this really derelict, abandoned motel. So the motel they're staying in is not the Four Seasons, and the place they go is even worse. It's full on abandoned. Sam is upset. He's crying. They haven't eaten. He's hungry. And so he's really upset. And he starts complaining that nobody ever tells me anything. Like I just watched this dad and some dude crash through a window. Like I know that we don't have normal lives here. Nobody will talk to me about something. And Dean is trying really desperately to get him to stop asking questions. And he says, if you promise to stop asking about mom, I will teach you to swim. And we have this really sweet little panel here of, um, you know, Sam and Dean in the back seat. Sam is crying, and we see, Dean trying to take care of his little brother. And what I like about it is again in season two, the season finale of season two is called All Hell Breaks Loose Part Two. And Dean tells this story about Sam being 5 years old and asking a lot of questions, so a little bit younger than we see him here in this graphic novel. And Dean is trying desperately to get him to stop asking because he wants him to hang on to his childhood just a little bit longer. Um, so I think this little mini graphic novel is kind of the best part about Origins, honestly. The artwork is much better than the rest of the issues, in my opinion. It makes a lot of sense compared to what we see in the show, and particularly when you take it together with the rest of the series, the origins, where we see again, 4-year-old Dean. John is looking at him like, I need you. I need you to step up here and help me. um that you can really see how desperate Dean is to have Sam's experience be different than his own. All right, well, that is Supernatural Origins, and that is Last Call. So cheers. Thank you so much for coming along with me for the ride. Let us know in the comments what you thought of this bonus episode and whether it's something you would like to see more of in the future. If you like what we're doing here at Hunter Fuel, please tell your friends, tell your family. Like our videos, subscribe so it's easier for other people to find us too. We love hearing from our SPN family, so comment or send us an email at hunterfuelpodcast@gmail.com. And you are heartily invited to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Hunter Fuel Podcast. We hope you'll join us next time for our usual game of Supernatural. Until then, be safe, everybody. Bye bye.